We'll have a invocation by Councilmember Treaky after the pledge. So if you would, please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Let us reflect. We are facing what is arguably the most frightening, challenging, and yet exciting times ever to confront human civilization. Change and disruption is being driven by technological and market forces far beyond any single person's ability to grasp or understand. The breakdown of civility and community, climate change, and the increasing ability of the working and middle classes to compete with the enormous capital now accumulating on Wall Street are each generating individual crises with potentially frightening consequences. I personally believe that it is the responsibility of each generation to pass along to the next generation a world that is at least as good as or better than the one that we were given. This is a serious task, one that requires listening and learning, challenging assumptions, thinking beyond the proven ways of the past, especially since those paths have brought us to this point. As we turn to tonight's work, I leave you with the words of Robert Frost, which, ironically in some ways, was first published in 1922. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask as if there is some mistake. The only other sound, the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The winds are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Treaky, and thank you for reminding us of that, what some would say was a fairly passable poet, Robert Frost of the 20th century. Those of us in Billings might better know him by his more important title, which was father-in-law of Billings Mayor Willard Frazier. So thank you for that little piece today. If you would, Denise, please call the roll.
Councilmember Shaw. Here. Gulick. Here. Neese.
Here.
Owen.
Here.
Joy.
Present.
Chiriqui.
I'm here.
Tidswell.
Excused.
Purington.
Here.
Boyette.
Excused.
Repsis.
Excused.
Mayor Cole.
Here. We're a little lighter tonight, but we've still got what we need, so we will press ahead. We've got 3 sets of minutes. First up, July 24, 2023. We have a change from Councilmember Neese on that one, I know. So, Councilmember Neese, I'm going to turn it over to you. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to make a motion to adopt the July 24th minutes with the change of, in I think paragraph 13 it was, where Councilmember Neese entertained the idea of leaving, it's going to state, leaving the setback of 20 feet for the first 2 floors, but requiring that levels above that be set back up to 50 feet, a 50-foot setback. And then Ms. Cromwell responded, while those were possible, they would also be very expensive. Developers would not wish to build that way. So the last sentence has not changed. The difference is we're taking the quote or the phrase of wedding cake, which is something I didn't say, but was mentioned by Nicole of what that was, and just rephrasing what I had mentioned.
Thank you very much. And for other council members, Denise has an exact copy of the language that you just heard described. So any other changes or comments? Or motion? Oh, and you had the motion, so for approval with that change, and second by Councilmember Purington. Any discussion And Councilmember Shaw, I'm going to let you finish reading before we proceed to a vote. So, okay. All right, we'll move to a vote. So the motion is for approval as amended. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. August 28th are pending September 11 minutes. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move we approve September 11th, 2023 minutes.
Second, Councilmember Gulick. Any discussion? Okay, if in favor of the motion for approval, September 11 minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Council courtesies. Our first thing up tonight is our Chief of Police, Chief St. John. It's all yours.
Mayor, Council, good evening. Officers Rockwell, Santiago, Newell, and Webley, report to the podium, please. Mayor, Council, I am honored to recognize these officers for their work as community service officers for the Billings Police Department. The Community Service Officer Program was implemented in the fall of 2022 following recommendations from the Center for Public Safety Management, CPSM, and the passage of the Public Safety Mill Levy. These 4 officers were hired for the fledgling program and trained to reduce the department's response time for some calls, assist sworn officers, gather evidence and information, and build community relations. I admit that I was skeptical that this program would help alleviate the workload for some officers or make significant difference in our efforts. I am pleased to report the contrary, and that the successes of this team have far exceeded initial expectations. Attitude and demeanor apart, the sheer number of calls these CSOs have handled speaks volumes. From October 1, 2022 through today, these officers have responded to 3,356 incidents, written 1,211 case reports, 226 follow-up reports, and 161 supplements, all of which would have waited for an available officer or volunteer had they not been in place, resulting in long response time, inefficient use of resources, and unhappy citizens. This group has received nothing but accolades from all divisions within the police department, and I will tell you that's very hard to do. They are deemed a valuable asset to the department in this city. Full credit for the early success of this CSO program goes to these officers. Their work ethic, can-do attitude, and professionalism have been the highlight of police operations. Honorable mention to Lieutenant Matt Lennox sitting in the back and his staff for developing the program and picking the very best candidates. Their actions reflect great credit upon themselves and the Billings Police Department. As such, it is my distinct honor to present these officers with this department's meritorious unit citation for their tireless effort, professionalism, and dedication to the Billings Police Department, the Community Service Officer Program, and the citizens in Billings. Mayor, this is Officer Amanda Newell, Kevin Rockwell, Colton Webley, and Francisco Santiago. Have certificates for each of them, which reference the verbiage that I read to you. Francisco. Congratulations. Colton. Thank you. Congratulations. Well done. Kevin. Thanks, Chief. Thank you. And last but not least, Amanda. Congratulations. Mayor, since this is a unit citation, we'll let them find a place to put this, not in the executive bathroom. We'll find some place appropriate. But again, it reflects and recognizes their great work as a unit, and couldn't be more pleased. Mayor?
Thank you again, Chief. You know, I think it'd be great if we did get a picture because you're going to want to be able to take advantage of this. And I see Mr. Lennox back there's just chomping at the bit to get a picture. So if the officers would just come forward, stand in front of us, would be honored to stand behind you and get a picture. I'm not sure if there's ever been a unit that's gotten a citation quite this quickly. So it's got to make some sort of history. Just right in front.
Yeah. Okay. We're fine.
You're good. All right, thanks again. Congratulations. It couldn't be said any better than the chief did. This has been a great development. We're very fortunate to have these men and women, and kudos to the whole department for rolling this out in a successful way. So congratulations. Okay, other courtesies. I just want to make sure that we recognize, I'm going to ask Councilmember Owen to make a few comments. Maybe she was intending to do this anyway, but many council members here were at the Family Justice Center Alliance planning session last week. I think it was a big success. We'll see what happens, but there was probably 60 or 70 people. A lot of good ground was plowed. A lot of learning took place. I know I appreciated the opportunity to learn a lot about family justice centers. So, Councilmember Owen, you were instrumental in that. You want to make further comment?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that opportunity and want to extend my thank you to you and the other council members who are here and dedicated so much time over the last week. Cannot talk enough about the incredible work going on under the leadership of Detective Katie Nash in the Billings Police Department and our AmeriCorps Vista Ellie Stanton, who have just been fierce champions for the safety of families in our community. Police Chief St. John came and spoke and reminded us that in the last year, 50% of all the aggravated assaults and more than 50% of all assaults were family violence related. Domestic PMFAs, violations of order of protection, significant serious crimes. And the Family Justice Center proposal represents an opportunity for us to come together as a community and make this a safer place, in particular for children. And we talked a lot about children last week, what they're growing up in and what their outcomes are. I was surprised to learn, I feel like I know a lot about this issue area, but I was surprised to learn that the studies show that children who grow up in a home environment with significant violence experience the exact same emotional, physical, and physiological impacts of themselves being directly abused. So we cannot understate how important it is to take swift and serious action to end family violence in this community. I was really pleased last week as we talked about how we can do better to see the city of Billings represented, the county attorney's office, Billings Police Department was there, we had state legislators there, we had judges from multiple jurisdictions there, social service providers from across the county, and just concerned citizens. It really was an opportunity for us to come together and say, this is a crime, and it will not be tolerated in our community. So the family justice proposal allows us to consider co-locating everyone who would come around victims and survivors of domestic violence. And I think our strategic planning session set out some big dreams and some small steps that we can take to begin moving forward. So I'm excited to see we will get a strategic plan back from this week's work, last week's work, and then we'll have some decisions to make here on council as to what we will prioritize and where we will go here. It is my belief that we can, if we work together, make this the safest place in the country to raise a family. And I think we should. And I think we took big steps last week, Mayor. So thank you for being there. And thank you to all of my colleagues for making this a priority.
Very good. Thank you very much. Other council courtesies, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, I would just like to say I recognize Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Trickey, and Mayor Cole, who were all at the duck, what do they call it? Regatta, I'm sorry.
The rubber duck regatta.
The rubber duck regatta in fundraising for prevention of elder abuse. And it was quite a lot of fun. There were a lot of wet kids, there were a lot of happy kids, and it was just really great. And the zoo is such a great venue for those kinds of things. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Other council courtesies? Don't see any. So any council, we don't have any proclamations this evening. Any council reports, organizations that you serve on behalf of the city? All right, then our city administrator, Chris, I know you've got a couple items.
I do. Unfortunately, have about a half a dozen, so let me work through them. So first, at your desks in front of you, you have 6 recommended motions for council consideration regarding regular agenda item 5. So it separates each of the potential changes to 1034 as text amendments. We also have 4 items to be removed from the agenda. The first 3 relate to issues of posting. So the first one is consent agenda item 1I, rates, parking rates. So essentially, to keep it simple, all rates, all fees, all adjustments you have to have a public hearing to make those adjustments, and we simply missed that. It was not advertised as a public hearing, it was put on consent agenda, so that, you'll see that come back to you later. And similarly, item 2, or regular agenda items 2 and 3 need to come off as well. Those were posted, but unfortunately, we did not meet the statute as far as the separation of when those advertisements have to come. They have to come, I think, not less than 5 days apart, 2 weeks in a row. And then the next item is per our conversation a week ago. That's item number 6 on the agenda, to remove ordinance changes regarding sale of property and purchase of property, things of that nature. I would ask the council to consider not taking any action tonight, but as we get into our future work sessions, the piece we would very much like to move forward with is those additional options on how to sell property, and we're going to get to talk about that a little bit, I think, when you get to your second to last agenda item this evening. 3 last ones: no ex parte communication, that's pretty simple. And then a reminder and an announcement to the public. They can find it on our webpage, but just a reminder that this Wednesday, September 27th, from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Public Library Community Room, we'll have a town hall type or a presentation from not only city staff, but a few others related to the Park, Rec, and Trail bond, and then we'll be answering questions. So we got a couple of hours that night focused on that issue. And then last but not least, this is a photocopy of mine. If you haven't gotten your property tax rebate from the state, please take the time to do it. It takes about 5 minutes if you've got the information. We've had a number of sessions at the public library. Fairly simple to get some directions to do so, but you got to take the 5 minutes before October 1st if you're eligible to get a $675 check from the state of Montana as a reduction on your property taxes. So we just have been trying to be as helpful as we can to all of our citizens to take advantage of that. And Mayor, that's all I have before we get rolling into the meeting.
Thank you, Chris. We'll get a motion before we get into the consent agenda after public comment on non-public hearing items to make those agenda changes. Let's hold off till we have public comment, and then I'll ask for that motion. So with that, we will ask for public comment on anything that is on our agenda this evening that does not have a public hearing later. So tonight, that's item 1, our consent agenda. Item 4B, which is the annexation agreement on the Blue Creek property. Item 7, the Park 1 first floor contract. And item 8, the Dick Anderson contract, adding the windows. There won't be public hearings on those items later, so if you'd like to comment on any of them, please come to the podium at this time, tell us your name, your address, and keep your comments to 3 minutes. So is there any public hearing comments on items 1, 4B, 7, or 8? And there's a copy of the agenda back on that cart there if anybody wants one and doesn't have it. Any public comment on those items at this time? No one's coming forward, and as far as I know, there's no one online, so that's visible. So we'll close the public comment period. And before we get to consent agenda, Councilmember Neese, so would you like to make that motion concerning those 4 items? Councilmember Neese.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to remove from the agenda item 1I, 2, 3, and 6.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second, Councilmember Purington. Any discussion? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. On item 1I, I was going to ask a question tonight and ask the Budget Committee, some members of the Budget Committee, and they didn't have the answer on this. When this comes back to us, would you mind indicating what the cost per kilowatt hours is? I think they had some discussions in the Budget Committee meeting about making sure that $3 an hour is actually covering our costs. for the electric parking that is in that pricing. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, the motion is for removal of those 4 items. Don't see any other discussion. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item 1, our consent agenda, and ask for separations. I'm going to start by separating 2 items. First, item 1D, the funding agreement between the city and Riverstone Health on nurse-family partnerships. I intend to just request one or propose one fairly simple change to that agreement. And then second, item 1G, donation of the Parks and Rec Department, and I need to recuse myself. So I'm going to hand when we get to that one, I'll hand the gavel to our Deputy Mayor Pro Tem to handle that item. Any other separations? Don't see any. So, okay, we'll move on. The first separation, which was mine, the funding agreement, or I'm sorry, for the non-separated items. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move to approve the items of the consent agenda as submitted, with the exception of items removed for separation, item D and G.
Thank you, Councilmember Shaw. Discussion. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Purinton.
I had some questions regarding 1E. I don't know if John is here or someone can answer those. Oh, here you come. I think what I was going for, Jessica, was some of the, okay, the window replacement on the 3rd floor. Will the county be required to do those whenever that time rolls around? And do we know, are they buying that 3rd floor now, or do we know?
So Councilmember Purinton, Mayor and Council, we don't know that the county will purchase the 3rd floor from us. When we get to the discussion on the window change order, we are proposing to purchase the windows now. We're purchasing all the windows for the entire building, but we would not install them in the county suite just because of the additional associated work with that, with having to tear apart their offices basically to replace the windows.
So, and I don't know, this may go to that other regular item, but I was trying to get a sense for the reasons for the delays in the furniture, the AV, the security, and I know it was mentioned also, you know, with the window replacement. So maybe that's going to come up in the window replacement?
Sure, I can just speak briefly to that, Councilmember Purinton. So when we approached this project, there were a lot of unknowns, especially on the cost side and what owner-supplied items we would be responsible for and what the contractor were. We knew what they were starting out, but we didn't want to go full in on design if we were then going to get too far in on cost, on the cost side, that we're saying, well, we're not going to have the budget to even do that, so let's not do the design on it yet. So when we knew we had the budget available to do the windows, that's when we said, okay, let's move ahead with the design. Of course, there's associated cost with the design of the windows. And then same with the AV. We didn't know if we were going to have city staff doing AV and doing sort of an ad hoc thing, or if we had the money to do a full-fledged AV package. And so when we knew we had the funds available to do it, we got those services as part of our design contract.
And just one follow-up.
Go ahead.
And so the security thing, that kind of made me a little nervous because I don't know what that entails. And I know that was one of the big items for our courthouses that we wanted to make, or our courtrooms, that we make sure that we've got proper security in those areas. So where's that security?
Yes, so Councilmember Purinton, Mayor and Council, so that was always in our owner supplied costs, our owner items was going to be providing the security. It just is, it depends on where in the project you employ those designers.
Okay.
You're not going to employ them until you kind of get underway. But yes, the security is a high priority for us. We have access control, we have cameras. I think we're working on a very good plan for security for the new facility.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Further discussion, Councilmember Denise.
Thank you, Mayor. Jessica, same item. So just real quick, and maybe you can update us at a later time, but, we've been adding different amendments to this project. Is there anywhere the public can go online to say, this is where the estimated total cost of the building's going to be, the new city hall? Is there a place that people can go to see that?
So Councilmember East, we haven't updated that lately. We actually are waiting to get an accurate update from our historic tax credit consultant that we're supposed to get at the end of this week. And then we'll have a clearer picture on some of the funding side of it. And then we will make sure we're actually planning to come back to council in the near future, probably at a work session, and just kind of go over where we are in budget and everything, including all these amendments.
Okay, that'd be good to helpful to know, because one of the things I hear often is, boy, we're approving amendment after amendment, and when is it going to stop? And so,
Sure.
And it may be helpful to maybe even have on that website, we anticipate X number of more amendments for certain things, we just don't know what the final cost is. Mayor, I do have one more follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Or different question. When you're doing these contracts in this, do we specify any of these that we're going to use local labor?
Pardon?
Are we specifying that local labor is required?
I would have to go back and look at that.
Okay.
regarding- I don't think there's any statutory requirement for that.
Okay, is that something the city has the capability to do?
I would defer to Gina.
Gina, you want to comment?
I think that council could have required that, but that wasn't included. It's my understanding that we don't think that that was included, so.
Okay, thank you. I think it'd be something, at least I know I'd be interested in making sure if we're spending this kind of money on a large project, that we're seeing how much local labor is actually being utilized for this.
Sure. And Councilmember Neese, when we do have the window item later, we do have our general contractor will be here, and he would certainly know how many of the subcontractors are local.
That would be great to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Gillick?
Just wanted to thank local artist Barbara Garrett for her pieces. They're very nicely rendered, and I think they'll be a great addition to our city hall. Our connection to our place, our beloved place, it captures them very well. So I want to thank her.
Thank you very much. Yeah, they're colorful and fit our community very well, I think, so. Okay, any other comment on before we vote on the motion? Non-separated items. Don't see any. The motion is for approval of those items. If in favor, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. First separated item, I'll just, will be item 1D, as in dog. Council, I recommend you pull or turn to that item. This is the contract with Riverstone Health to add 2 additional FTEs to the nurse family partnership. And the proposed change, I put in an email late this morning or early this afternoon and sent around, so many of you have probably seen it, but in Exhibit A, which is at the end of the agreement, it's sort of the scope of the agreement or the deliverables. The sentence currently reads under the first sentence of paragraph 1. Currently says provide, so this is what Riverstone promising to do, provide 2 full-time equivalent registered nurses to provide home visiting services using the Nurse Family Partnership Evidence-Based Fidelity Program model to expectant parents and or parents of child up to 2 in the city of Billings. My concern about that was they're already doing that. And I think the clear intent that we've always talked about, and there's no disagreement about this, is that they would be adding 2 additional full-time equivalents. And I'm sure that would be everybody's intent, but with the passage of time, you could imagine a situation where we keep sending our check, but because maybe they don't have the ability to staff all of those positions, they've got our money and they're applying it to the cost of the project, but not actually adding the FTEs. Nor does it say what the baseline is, where they're starting at, that we would then measure 2 additional on top of what. And so the proposed agreement, or the proposed change is just to that one sentence, to add the word additional after two, so it would say provide 2 additional full-time equivalent registered nurses. And then after that phrase, add the parenthetical, Riverstone currently employs 2.5 nurse FTEs. Then close the parentheses just to establish what they're starting with, what the FTEs are. So I would make the motion to approve item 1D with that change. Also, I guess with the understanding or condition that the city administrator would just double check the 2.5 number. That was Chris's understanding of what they currently have employed. And just make sure and give him discretion to change that number if necessary, but that's our understanding of what it is at this point. Second by Councilmember Owen. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. I just think this is a tremendous opportunity that's come forward over a period of time, and I really appreciate the opportunity that the city has to have this impact. And we talked a lot through our public safety, what would it mean to get on the prevention side? What would it mean to get ahead of having just police officers go out and another arrest and the whole entire criminal justice system then grinding through another case? And this opportunity came up, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the city. There were questions at one time about whether or not this evidence, this is very well documented, the kinds of return on investment that this makes. But there were questions about, well, you're only impacting a pregnant mother plus 2 years. But those are those critical years when all of those, that growth in brain, the growth in the networking, in the synapses in the brain, those are the critical moments. And so I really want to say thank you to Riverstone and appreciate the council seeing this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. I would fully associate myself with those remarks. I think this is a significant opportunity for us. It is the case, I think, that when we talk about crime prevention, home visiting just works. It's documented over and over and over. From my perspective, this program merits city funding because of the documented evidence here in our community of a crime prevention impact. Nurse Family Partnership has operated in the Billings community for 12 years, and in those years we have seen a demonstrated reduction of about 2/3 in domestic violence among moms involved in this program. So I believe this merits our tax investment because there is a clear link to our public safety priorities. There are lots of home visiting programs. All of them come together to create a network that makes it safer and better for children, that improves outcomes for families. This particular program is very targeted at a high-risk population with clear crime prevention results, not to mention all the ongoing social benefits that comes from home visiting. So I think this really is a worthy investment for us to make, and I am excited to see us help this program grow.
Thank you very much. Okay, council, anything else before we move to a vote? Don't see anything, so the motion is for approval of item 1D with that change and understanding about the authority of the city administrator. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Brings us to next separated item, item 1G, and here I'm passing the gavel and whatever you call the thing that the gavel hits to our Deputy Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, thank you. We have item 1G, donation to the Parks and Recs Department from Fidelity Charitable Donation Advice Fund Grant. Is there a motion? Denise?
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem. I move that we approve donation to Parks and Recreation Department from Fidelity Charitable Donor Advised Fund Grant.
Second by Councilman Gulick. And just before I ask for the question on this, Mayor, this was actually, Mayor, I just want to ask why you recused yourself for this.
Yeah, I should have said that. I'm the source of the proposed donation.
Okay, thank you. And so for those of you who don't know, this is...
And my wife. I should have said that or I'll get in trouble.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So if those who don't know, there'll be some sculptures that will be along the Skyline Trail, which is very generous. Again, like a lot of donations, as I mentioned, the paintings that we received, so this is very generous of donors donating things to the city. So all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that then brings us to our regular agenda. And items 2 and 3 are removed earlier, so it brings us to item 4 and all of the sub-items there. So I think we've got Hunter with us, so we'll turn it over to Hunter Kelly when you've got your PowerPoint up and going.
Mayor, did you want me to read those?
Oh,
Into the record.
thank you, Denise. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have a joint hearing on 4A, which is the annexation, and then the zone change. A little I and A little 2. So Denise, would you read 4A little I and little 2?
Yes, resolution approving annexation 2307. It's a parcel located at 2449 Blue Creek Road, north of Blue Creek Road and west of Colleen Drive. Staff recommends approval for that item. The second item is first reading ordinance for zone change 1035. It's generally located at 2449 Blue Creek Road, Lot 7 of Blue Creek Acreage Tract subdivision. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 review criteria.
Okay, thank you very much. Our first item up will be, we'll have joint hearing on this, but our presentation first will be on the annexation resolution for a little I. Although, Hunter, I imagine are you grouping both of these
It's
together
on two.
in your presentation?
Yeah, it's good.
The annexation and the zone change?
Yes.
Okay. It's all yours.
Okay, so tonight we have annexation number 2307 and zone change 1035. So to explain the interconnectedness of all the items tonight, we'll be going over the annexation itself and the zone change that'll be held together in one public hearing. Zone change 1035 will go from an RR1 county zone to an N3 city zone. And likewise, we will also hear the ward boundary ordinance going into Ward 3 as its own public hearing without a presentation. And the last item is the annexation agreement for all the above described items. So here's the location of the annexation. It is best described as 2449 Blue Creek Road in between the Briarwood Estates subdivision to the southeast and the Cedar Park subdivision to the northwest. More accurately, also described as Lot 7 of Blue Creek Acreage Tracts subdivision. So here's the lots next to all the limits of annexation currently. So all that green area with our most recent updates to the annexation policy, where this used to be a red area, we now go green for go. And likewise, here's a satellite image of the site. So as you can see, it's directly next to, right off of Blue Creek Road, and directly adjacent from the nearby fire station. So here's the current zoning map of the vicinity. So this parcel, as well as pretty much everything immediately adjacent to it, is zoned RR1, rural residential, minimum 1 acre, maximum 2.99 acres. Right across the street is P2, Public 2, which is required for all of our civic institutions. So the fire station there is the best bet for it. And then sort of nearby is some N4 zoning, a similar large lot residential. And then the two major subdivisions I described previously Briarwood Estates subdivision is its own planned unit development, still technically operating off of our old zoning code rules of R6000, R9600, et cetera, et cetera. And then the Cedar Park subdivision to the northwest is operating under the N3 zoning. And so here is the location of the property, kind of in a greater vicinity. You can see these dashed lines right here. Those are the current city limits, given the kind of enclaves that Cedar Park and Briarwood Estates have created. Here are some of our posting photos for the annexation and zoning. So looking north right onto the property, looking southeast towards Briarwood Estates, looking south directly at the fire department, the Blue Creek Volunteer Fire Department, and then looking northwest towards Cedar Park and the rest of the city of Billings. So, for this annexation, we have looked at it and we feel that this is in fact meeting all of our criteria. It is within the limits of annexation map, as I previously showed. The city will be able to provide adequate city services to the slot. This annexation is being done for the purpose of hooking up to city water and sewer services. As it was described by the applicant, any kind of feeding into local water and septic systems would have been unfeasible. And so we are now opting to connect to the city services, which a line runs through Blue Creek Road, which already serves Briarwood Estates subdivision. This area, this property, as the rezone and annexation will occur, will confer with our growth policies plans. Currently, there is only one residence planned for development on this property, but due to the shape of the lot, future subdivision and denser development is possible in the future, but nothing is immediately planned except for that one single-family residence. And likewise, we have taken a look at the zoning criteria. So again, they are going from an RR1 rural residential to an N3 zoning, which is kind of our least dense single-family residential zoning available. It is the closest comparable zoning generally we have that's applicable for the city. RR1 is not a zoning type within city limits, so it is required to change that as part of this annexation. And then likewise, I previously stated for zone change 1035, the density, the zoning will allow for low to moderate density as we allow for it. It generally allows for currently one dwelling unit for every minimum 60 feet of lot width. Due to the shape of the lot, as I described earlier, it's sort of a tall, skinny one. But that does allow for future subdivision and placement of additional lots. So, with all that in mind, staff is recommending holding a public hearing and taking comment to the annexation. Staff is recommending conditional approval of the annexation subject to an annexation agreement. And then for the zone change, the zoning commission, pardon me, the zoning commission is recommending approval on a 5-0 vote, a unanimous vote. Any questions?
Okay, questions, and then we'll have a public hearing on both the zoning issue and the annexation. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned that zoning allows one lot per 60 feet, but didn't the state just change it to where now two units can be built on any?
As I understand it, that was something that was recently passed by the state legislature, but I believe that would not go in effect until January.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So I believe the wording of that bill would mention that it also would allow for up to 2 dwelling units per structure, so it would allow for duplexes as well.
Okay, thank
But
you.
in the immediate future, only a single-family dwelling is planned.
Okay. And Mayor, just another follow-up question. I noticed that Public Works said there was no concern on this, but you mentioned this is an enclave, so there's a kind of light opening there, and I'm not saying that we're going to annex anyone in there, because I think there's some concerns that the city may annex some of these properties in. But as they come in and annex, do you know if we're going to have to do some upgrades to any of the infrastructure that's in Blue Creek, or was that, when it was put in, was it already planned to, accommodate for this size of development there?
Off the top of my head, Councilmember Neese, I am not sure. As was described to me, this particular annexation would meet the demand that it's currently designed for. I couldn't comment as to if any additional neighbors on what impacts to the water and sewer infrastructure that would make.
Thank you. Mayor, I see Debbie in the back. Would we be able to get Debbie to ask that?
Absolutely.
Answer that?
Debbie?
Thank you, Councilmember Neese, for the question. Yes, it was all designed and constructed to be able to accommodate the growth in this area.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Hunter? Councilmember Tricky?
Looking at the long-range transportation plan, I don't see where the second road coming out of Briarwood necessarily would come out. Do we know if it would be connecting with Colleen Drive?
I'm not certain. I don't have the knowledge for that question. As far as I was made aware, is the only connection is going to be to Blue Creek Road itself.
Mayor and Council and Councilmember Shariki, the emergency access currently does go out to Colleen Drive. So, I mean, at this point, that's the additional access. If that was to be, I guess we were looking at further improvements in that area. That's the potential where that could go connect in the future with a full access, but nothing's planned at this time.
Okay, so it's likely but not planned. Thank you.
Okay, other questions for staff? Wyeth, while you're there, or Hunter, or both of you, whoever wants to answer this, I'd sent an email on Friday addressing how we handle the analysis of parks and sufficiency of parks on this. And so the staff report on annexation, item number 5, and item number 4 for the zoning criteria, both raise the issue of the sufficiency of park resources. And the staff report does what all of our staff reports have done on this issue, is if they're not creating parkland or making participating in a park maintenance district, the staff report just accurately reports, quoting now in the annexation staff report, this property is not adjacent to an existing park maintenance district, nor creating additional parkland for the city. Therefore, the criteria does not apply. And I push back on that a little bit, wondering why we care very much about whether the utilities are sufficient to the property, why police service is sufficient, why we can service with the fire department, but we give no analysis whatsoever about where the largest park is, how far away, and whether it's sufficient. I'm not proposing that we deny this based on a lack of parks, but I think it's has gotten us in trouble for 50 years when we haven't looked at the availability of large park resources, but we keep annexing without giving it any analysis at all. So my question is, it's too late for this report, which doesn't surprise me at all, but in the future, can we at least get the Parks Department to tell us where the closest parks are and give us some sort of analysis, even if it's just a sentence or two, about the sufficiency of park resources in that area? Do you have any philosophical or practical problems with doing that in the future?
Mayor and Council, after we received your email, we're having some internal discussion about exactly what you just described in terms of what information could be provided and kind of how we would do that. So the answer is yes, in terms of looking at in the future how, what could be reported, what information would be available. We certainly have noticed we have different types of Annexations, ones where we know they're gonna come in, it's a large, large acreage, there's gonna be development, et cetera, versus something like this where it's a lot smaller, but we can certainly, I've reached out to Parks Director Mike Pigg about whether we can at least provide some information about proximity to existing park resources, and then also, is this something that's gonna develop further and have, the potential for cash in lieu or land?
Okay, thank you. That'd be my request and recommendation. On this topic,
Yes.
Councilmember Rowan, Councilmember Triki?
Thank you, Mayor. I know that sometimes staff are uncertain if they should do something when only one council member says it. Not that you're the mayor, but I just want to fully agree with you. It's long been my concern that we don't really establish an analytical record. So here, for example, we just say police and fire department didn't state concerns. Well, that's not really the question. The question is it facilitating the adequate provision of these services? So I agree that just one or two more analytical sentences that give the data or the backup would definitely be in the future something worth doing. So that's 2 votes for a little more.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Triki?
Are parks included in the model that the cost of living the cost of services study doing?
I believe, Councilmember Triki, Mayor and Council, I believe they are. I don't know all the specifics of that, but I believe they're in the list in the group that we're working with the consultant on.
If you find out otherwise, warn us. If you find out otherwise, warn us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Seems like they should be. So thank you very much. Okay, any other questions for staff before we go to a joint public hearing on this item? Or 2 items? Okay, I think we're good. So this is time we'll open up for public hearing on items 4A little I and little 2, the proposed annexation, Blue Creek annexation of this parcel, and the zone change. If you'd like to comment on either of those items, please come forward. Just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address up front. Any public comment on items 4A little I or 4A little 2? No one's coming forward. No one's online. So we'll close the public hearing and back to council. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve a resolution approving annexation 23-07 as recommended by staff.
Thank you. Second by Councilmember Shaw. Discussion? Any discussion? Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. When I first came on council in 2018, I met with Director Friday and I said, looking at what had happened in the past, there's Briarwood in the city, and this huge gap between the river and that little bit of development that's between there and Briarwood. And so considering that our cost of services, the water line, the services are provided in the ground, the utilities are provided in the ground, this is somewhere where we can actually start to recoup a little bit of our investment. By having stretched all the way out to Briarwood, put in those investments, we haven't gotten any kind of return on that. So this is an opportunity, and I hope they choose to subdivide. If they choose to subdivide, they choose a density that not only is a good return for them, but also for the city. And I think this is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? Okay, the motion is for approval. Okay, we need 2 votes, so we're first dealing with the, and I think you clarified that it was just for the annexation for a little I. So that is the motion on that item only. If in favor of the motion for approval on annexation, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion relating to item 4A little 2? Councilmember Joy.
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1035 and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Thank you. We'll keep it consistent. Councilmember Shaw. Further the discussion now on the zone change. Any discussion? Okay, if in favor of the motion for approval, item 4A little 2, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes those two. Brings us to item 4A, B, the annexation agreement. Hunter, do you have a presentation on the item 4B, the annexation agreement?
I do not have a presentation, but I have some slides here with some information if that pleases you.
Okay. Did Councilman Parrington, where you think Debbie had something she wanted to address?
Here, your presenter.
Oh, you're right.
That's all right, Mayor, I'll just.
You almost got off the hook.
I did, it was close.
Wasn't my fault, it's Councilmember Parrington to put you back on the hook. Just don't forget. Back to you.
So the only thing I would point out is on this one, it's similar to our previous, we're consistent with our previous decisions to charge for sanitary sewer and water that have been put in previously and have those fees or the cost of that initial installation paid for by the developers. So these are consistent with that.
Okay, any questions for Debbie? Councilmember Dees?
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, when was those infrastructure put in? How many years ago?
The water was put in 2003 and the sewer was put in 2009.
Okay. And so these numbers that they're paying, 5,500 for the water and 18,000 for the sewer, is that 2003 and 2009 dollars?
Yes.
Because this is an annexation, could we not inflate those to the rate of inflation since 2003 and 2009 to make sure we're recouping that investment that the city had and putting that in there?
So our policy does not define how we do that. And so, yes, there's opportunity to inflate those numbers. The way we looked at that is there's also, what's the word when something loses its?
Wear and tear? Depreciation?
Depreciation, thank you. It was a D.
Yeah.
Yes, there was depreciation on it. So when we looked at the inflation versus the depreciation of them, they're 20-year-old facilities. And so we kind of looked at the construction costs being appropriate.
I see. Yeah, I'd like to, that, to me, it just seems like they're getting a pretty good deal for hooking into this. And I think we probably need to adjust the policy to where we have some type of inflation, or maybe it's not the full rate of inflation over time, because you mentioned the depreciation, that makes sense. But at the same time, yeah, this is, and again, I'm not going to oppose it on this particular one, but I sure would like to see some policy, and I've talked about this before, having this change where we have some kind of formula that's, we can charge a little bit more for what we've already invested and recoup that better. Thank you.
I would second that if staff comes up with a good formula. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. This doesn't require a public hearing, so I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. I move to approve an annexation agreement with Andrew, I apologize if I say this name wrong, Bedicher and Michelle Spinney as recommended by staff.
Very good. Is there a second? Councilmember Joy? Discussion. Councilmember Parrington?
So Debbie, I'm sorry you have to make the walk again. And so number 5, it's the right-of-way. And the developers are required to dedicate 10 feet of right-of-way along the frontage. So, and then it goes into the sidewalks. Do they have to put a sidewalk in right now?
No, not at this time. There's no facilities on either side of it. So we do have the waiver, and because it's an annexation, it's a lifetime waiver. So the sidewalk is included, and there's also a comment about a multi-use path in there that if we build a multi-use path, then they're required to contribute to that.
Okay, because I just, build a sidewalk to nowhere, so, thank you.
Debbie, on item number 8 in the annexation agreement, it deals with future intersection contributions. And it has the standard language that the developer will have to chip in if if it triggers a transportation study because it exceeds 500 trips per day on this 3-acre parcel. That would be a heck of a development that would ever trigger that. So it's never going to happen. But my concern about that is it seems to rule out the possibility of any other contribution for intersection improvements. When we put all of our chips on the 500 trips per day number, in a situation like this where that's never going to happen, why do we use that language? Why don't we get rid of that and just instead add this to the possibility that it could be added as part of a waiver of a future SID? And this property might have to pay its proportionate share just as much as anybody else. Because right now, that paragraph 9 starts with the premise, for any other improvements not specifically listed in this agreement, then we might be able to rely on our waiver and hit you up with an SID. Well, because we have mentioned intersection improvements, it's like we have shot ourselves in the foot and ruled out the possibility of ever hitting them up with an SID for intersection improvements, because we said that'll only happen if they have 500 trips per day, which is never going to happen. So you see my concern.
I do, Mayor, the state law is very clear that if someone gains benefit from the SID that's in place, we can charge them for that. So that waiver does cover signals if you look on that. And yes, they won't specifically be required to build an intersection or contribute to an intersection right now. But depending on what that's done, and then if intersections are built in the future, the state law does allow us to assess them for it. And the waiver, again, is in perpetuity.
And I'm sure state law does that. I hope that this could not be interpreted in the future as our having waived our rights under state law when we don't, there's no need to. So I would just encourage you to take a look at that when there's no, it's never going to happen, and just rely on that as any other improvement. Councilmember Purinton.
Just a quick question, because I know that the document keeps talking about developers. And from my understanding, it's a single-family residence. So to me, it's going to be the owners at that point. So is there a shift in that language for further down the line, and kind of like what the mayor's talking about, I suppose, they might sell the property and someone else owns it, but those owners aren't the developers. So is there a shift in language someplace with that, or is it just understood?
So again, because this annexation agreement does cover the waiver specifically forever, we say developer because if this property sells, it does run with the land. And so that language is in there. If a developer does choose to come in, they would come in over a subdivision as well, and there'd be an SIA, but this annexation then would still go with that land.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's paragraph 11 for everybody's interested. Okay, anything else for Debbie? All right, thank you very much. Okay, we have a motion for approval of item 4B. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to the vote then. The motion is for approval. Item 4B, the annexation agreement. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Final item on item 4 is the ordinance to add this to Ward 3. We do need to have a public hearing. Hunter, any presentation on this? Okay, thank you. So for anybody in the audience, this is the next item is to just add this property, which we have approved annexation of, to Ward 3 of the city. Is there any questions for staff? If not, I'm going to open it for public hearing. Is there any public comment on item 4C, adding this to to Ward 3? No public comment, so we'll close the public comment on item 4C. Is there a motion? Councilmember Joy.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. This printed agenda doesn't have that item on it. Does it appear? It's right there.
Might have an old version.
Sorry, it's right here. Thank you, Councilmember Owen. My eyes, I need cheaters that keeps getting longer arms. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the first reading ordinance expanding the boundaries of Ward 3 as recommended by staff.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Gulick. Okay, any discussion? Councilmember Neese?
Just real quick, because we have the presentation up. I don't know if we have if we actually could see anyone from public comment.
Was there, open and closed that, assuming there was nobody online?
No, Mayor, there's no one online.
No? Okay, very good. So we'll proceed to the vote. The motion is to approve item 4C. If in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes then item 4 and brings us to item 5, These are the zoning text amendments. Denise, would you read item 5?
Public hearing and first reading ordinance for zone change 1034, zoning text amendments, Phase 3, landscape and off-street parking relief, landscape plan clarifications for residential, special review criteria, and zoning at annexation. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 review criteria for these items only.
Thank you very much. Council will have a presentation on, I'm assuming, all of them together, and we'll have, it is a public hearing, so we'll open up a public hearing on all of the items. But when we get to actual votes, we will need to have motions on each item because there are 6 separate ordinances, and earlier was distributed proposed language for each of those 6 motions. Our zoning coordinator, Nicole.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is the last planned text amendment to the zoning code as part of our warranty of that new code adopted in 2021. We do, as Councilmember Neese pointed out, have some legislative changes to address. Some of those we will address administratively as we are embarking on a new growth policy plan, which you graciously funded, and that will take a number of years to get through, and we will be doing another whole cycle of zoning and land use regulation amendments as part of that process. In any case, this is the last group that we had planned to bring forward to you. The first one relates to administrative relief section of the code, which is in the administrative section, 1600. This is where we plan to have all of the process together in one place on how to get very minor adjustments to the code requirements. There are 2 sections of the code, one for a maximum parking waivers or reduction in off-street parking that are not included in this language in the administrative relief section. In addition, there's landscaping administrative relief, which is in the landscaping section of the code, not incorporated with the administrative relief. So this code amendment is to bring in those 2 waivers or administrative relief provisions and say, we'll process them the same way we do other administrative relief in section 1614. The criteria for granting those waivers will remain just as they're currently written in the parking code at 27-1300 and in the landscaping code. So there's no change that we're planning for those criteria. I'll give you an example of the one parking maximum waiver that we received last year for Costco. Costco is a different type of retailer. They're not Albertsons, so to speak. So they have a much wider market. They have a much different type of customer and parking needs. They provided us with a traffic engineering study of why they were providing this much parking. And we granted that waiver from the maximum off-street parking, and they are providing, as part of that, conditions for that provision of waiver is that they are planting 123 additional trees of at least 2-inch caliber and 490 additional shrubs of at least 5-gallon size. And the landscape was designed by a landscape architect. So that's the one example. We got, in the last 2 years, we got one request for a maximum parking waiver. It's not a normal request. Most people prefer to have either what the code requires or even a little less, depending on the situation. Some of the other parts of the administrative relief that we wanted to provide corrections for were that only in certain zones, under the current regulations, can you get administrative relief for building height, or for lot coverage, or for fencing. So we said, really, these types of administrative relief apply to most zoning districts. So let's make the language the same for the two groups that are listed in administrative relief and normalize them across those zones. We've processed approximately 10 to 12 total administrative relief requests each year. Most of those are for minor adjustments in setbacks or build-to ranges. Some of them have been for some of the more complex part of the form-based code, but the code only allows a minor adjustment. We always tell the applicants, if you're going beyond this, you have to go to the Board of Adjustment to prove a variance, which is a little higher bar to prove you need a variance. So the next section is we want to clarify completely that landscape plans are not required to be submitted for single or two-family dwelling parcels that are built on their own lot. The code does require that street trees be installed, but we don't require a landscape plan. We do make a note of that by stamping those building plans when they're issued, that those are required. But that's the only thing that is required for them. If the parcel is in a unit ownership, like a townhome or patio home, then the landscape plan is submitted with that master site plan, and we require each unit as it's built to install that landscaping piece that's around that unit. So that's how we deal with that. Also, the current code requires a landscape architect to design for a parcel that's 1 acre or more, which is different than the county code. County code says 1.5 acres is the trigger level to require a landscape architect. We have found that, one, we didn't have a lot of landscape architects for builders and developers and designers to choose from. Fortunately, the state of Montana has reciprocity with other states around it to accept licensing from other states. So people have gone as far away as Washington, California, Colorado to find landscape architects to design a landscape for a 1 acre site in Billings. So we thought it would probably make sense to let's set that trigger point at 1.5, where it really does make a difference for drainage design and for good landscaping choices. At 1 acre on a commercial site, you do get a lot of good service locally from landscape firms and nurserymen. So that's what we're proposing here, to make those adjustments. And then add that new language in to say, go to administrative relief section to get your relief from landscaping if you need it. This normally applies to existing sites that don't have a good opportunity to provide landscaping on site, or they need adjustments to the proportionate compliance they have to put in. So that's where we see that landscaping relief coming in. It's not usually for new sites at all. Okay, then the next section has a bunch of different places that we found more errors, and then found some uses that should have been included in zone districts and were not. So there was a conflict between where residential uses need to be located. Is it the first 20 feet of a ground floor of a building or the first 30 feet? So we've consolidated that to 20 feet for the ground floor first 20 feet of the building frontage. Then we had Rocky Vista University was built in Billings, and it's not an allowed use in a campus zone district, even though obviously for, it's a medical college. It could be in a P3 medical campus district, so we thought it would be prudent to put that in as an allowed use. Also, business and personal services were not included as allowed uses in the light industrial zone district, and I know we have many of those types of businesses in light industrial districts, so we want to add that in. Also, the large format retail like Costco or some of the much larger Sam's Club, make that an allowed use in a light industrial zone as well. And car washes, because we have the heavy industrial zone district. Sometimes the closer you are to a car wash and a heavy industrial zone, the better it is, because sometimes those uses need to have vehicle cleaning as they're coming to or leaving sites. Also, vehicle service with the convenience store is not included in either industrial district. We'd like to add that in. There was a minor error for cross-reference for wireless facilities. We'd like to fix that. We also didn't include home occupations as an allowed use in all zoning districts. In other words, if you had a home that had the unfortunate circumstance of being in a light industrial district, you couldn't have a home occupation. But if your home was in an N3 district, you could. So we just figured that, hey, let's make that allowable. If you have a residence in a commercial zone, let's allow you to have a home occupation. We had a cross-reference error in the sign code for Public 1 zone districts. And then the status, we wanted to update the language for status of withdrawn applications and who allows the withdrawal of an application. Before the hearing is advertised, an applicant can withdraw and staff can say yes. After it's advertised, then it's the zoning commission or the Board of Adjustment. If it's the zoning commission, it can also be withdrawn here at the city council. Also, we've seen a new restaurant format that has no indoor seating at all and no outdoor seating. It's just drive-through or walk-up window. And our parking code doesn't have that as a use. It anticipates that every restaurant will have some seating available. So we would like to include that as ask the zoning coordinator for how much parking you need to provide. Since there was no agreement on, well, should it be one for 500 feet? Should it be one per employee? So we'll do it on a case-by-case basis. There were also some cross-reference errors in the definition section. And also included this is the non-zoning ordinance, which changes the zone district references in the fire prevention code and in the traffic code of the city. Those are chapter 14 and chapter 24. One part of this amendment was not recommended, and it is not in your ordinance, in your packet, which was some adjustments to the definition of sign types, monument signs versus pole signs, and adjustments to those definitions and how they would be regulated. The zoning commission believed that those were beyond minor and that the city staff should go back and do that as a major amendment, not a minor adjustment. And then special review, the current code is silent on conditions of approval to bring existing sites and buildings into conformance. We believe that you already have the ability to do this under special review applications, but we wanted to make it absolutely clear to applicants and to everyone reading the code that if you have a deficiency in your site, whether it's landscaping or you have a sign that's too large, that the city council may impose a condition of approval to bring that particular part of the site into conformance. And then finally, zoning at annexation. Right now, the code only contemplates two different types of zoning actions at annexation. It's either submit and you have a zoning that's already allowed in the city, and so we don't have to do a zone change. Submit a zone change to a zone district that you want to be located in, like the previous application you just heard. We required the submittal of a zone change application to N3 from N4. And then it should be three options. And then for parcels that are 10 acres or larger, the current code says you must do a planned neighborhood development. Well, there's some parcels that are larger than 10 acres that are not appropriate for, nor are the developers interested in building new neighborhoods. They're interested in building commercial property and annexing it to the city for services. But the code currently is silent on that option, although we have done it a few times now under the current code. So the big warehouses that are going up on South Frontage Road were annexed and zoned heavy commercial. They did not require a PND. They were agriculturally zoned before they were annexed. We did a annexation and zone change for the city, additional 20 acres down at the Billings Operations Center. That was not a PND. That the zoning was public to match the existing zoning of the existing operations center. So our proposal is to amend this zoning at annexation to allow people who have existing developments. Let's say I have a single family home, the septic system failed, everything around me is in the city and it's zoned N3. There's really no other choice other than N3. We would say, we'll annex you and we will zone you N3. If you want a zone that's different than that, that's when you have to make an application for a zone change. And we would allow parcels that are larger than 10 acres to not do a planned neighborhood development if the location really is not conducive to that type of zoning process. So those are the proposals to amend that section of the code. Of course, there's always the option of someone who doesn't agree with the planning staff's recommended zoning at the time that they're petitioning for annexation to submit a separate zone change. But there's locations that are obviously not conducive to PNDs, as the examples I already gave you. And I think that's the end of the presentation. Of course it is. I'd be happy to take any of your specific questions on any of these ordinances.
Thank you, Nicole. So we'll have questions for Nicole, and then we'll open for public hearing on all 6 of those proposed ordinances. Council, any questions for Nicole? Councilor Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, the change that you're going to make about the home occupation in all zones, would this open it up for light industry or even heavy industry to start creating their homes within an industrial area and that, or is this, I mean, how do we prevent suddenly people saying, well, I live here now, or they've created add to the next to their business, a home, and now they're living in the industrial area?
Well, home occupations are limited to a certain set of
Okay.
uses. And you cannot build a new structure, a new residence in an industrial or heavy commercial zone. Those are not allowed uses. This would just extend that home occupation allowance to people who already have homes in those zone districts.
Okay,
So
so,
even though you're in a heavy industrial zone with your little house, you wouldn't be able to do smelting or forging or petroleum refining or anything like that.
okay, so it would still prevent someone to converting their warehouse, a section of it, into their home and saying, this is where I live now, or something like that?
No, no, we don't allow establishment of uses that are not allowed in the zone district as new uses.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Nicole? Don't see any, so we'll open up for public hearing on item 5, and specifically all of those proposed changes to 6 different groups of ordinances. If anybody would like to comment, please come forward. Just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address.
I'm Doug Wild, 4712 Audubon. I'm here for the Home Builders Association. To keep it real brief, just wanted to, again, thank city staff for their time that they've taken in putting together these zoning code amendments. They've been great to work with along the way. I feel like they've heard our concerns and have addressed them. Mostly just here to say thank you to city staff and appreciate their time in tweaking the code to make it a little better for us. She says it's the last round of these ones. Sure, I'm sure we'll have other concerns down the road, but in general, very happy with how the process has gone.
Thank you for saying that, Doug. We appreciate it. Yeah, I'll believe that this last one too, but we'll see. But good to keep our eyes on potential changes. Any other public comment, part of this public hearing on item number 5? Any other public comment? No one is standing up. There's nobody online. So we will close the public hearing on item number 5. Council, I'd recommend we just, unless there's general discussion about the process, move through one at a time. Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading of the ordinance amending City Code Section 27-1614, providing administrative relief, and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Thank you. Second by Councilmember Shaw. Any discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote on the first ordinance. The motion is for approval. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes. Second item up, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading of the ordinance amending City Code Section 27-1618, providing landscape plan process, and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Second by Councilmember Gulick. Discussion. Any discussion on item number 2? No, we'll proceed to a vote. If in favor of the motion for approval, the second proposed ordinance, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 3, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading of the ordinance amending City Code Sections 27-1000, 27-1300, 27-1400, 27-1500, 27-1600, and 27-1800 to correct errors, cross-references, omissions, and to provide clarification of regulations and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by zoning staff.
And actually, recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Oh, sorry, Zoning Commission.
Thank you very much. The second, Councilmember Gulick. Any discussion? Seeing none, if in favor of the motion for approval, please say aye. Item number 3. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 4, Councilmember Shaw.
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading of the ordinance amending City Code Sections 14-300 and 24-600 to correct errors, cross-references, omissions, and provide clarification of the regulations and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Thank you. Second by Councilmember Gulick. Any discussion? Seeing none, if in favor of the motion for approval, item number 4, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 5. Councilmember Joy.
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading of ordinance amending City Code Section 27-1623, providing special review criteria and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Second by Councilmember Gulick. Any discussion? Motion is for approval. Item number 5. If in favor, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 6, final item, Councilmember Gulick.
Having conducted a public hearing, consider written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve first reading of the ordinance amending City Code Section 27-1615, providing for zoning at annexation, and Section 27-800, providing for planned neighborhood development, and adopt the findings of the 10 review criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Thank you. Second, Councilmember Shaw. Any discussion? Okay, we'll move to the vote. Motion is for approval. Item number 6. If in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes item number 5, those text agreements. Item number 6 has been removed. We'll move to item number 7. Denise, would you read item number 7?
Purchase and sales agreement of Park 1 ground retail space to Journey Willow Cottage LLC. City Council Operations Committee recommends council reject all proposals.
Thank you very much. John Caterino, our facilities manager, will have the presentation. John.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to set some background context, and then I'll pass it over to our broker, Matt with NAI, to elucidate anything that is ambiguous and then answer questions that City Council might have. So, sale of real property, Park 1 Retail. In late 2022, Council approved a resolution to sell real city property. Park 1 Retail was one of those spaces, the other 3 being 2 surface lots on North 27th and then also City Hall. In April of 23, staff issued an RFP, and unfortunately, we only received 2 offers. At which point we met with the Operations Committee, and they directed staff to enter negotiations with Journey Willow Cottage. They were the highest submitter. We negotiated the sale price of the subject property from $700,000 to $750,000, and then we met in September of this year again with the Operations Committee, and after further discussion with them and our broker, they recommend rejecting all bids and re-advertising, primarily due to the sale price that was offered. Staff is currently condoing the subject property, so when we do move forward with the actual sale, we've got that condoed off from the rest of the structure. And then additionally, we do have a purchase and sale agreement attached to the council memo if council does vote in favor of selling the subject property. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you. Matt.
Matt Robertson, 3531 Timberline Drive. If you have any questions regarding the sale, we put together a valuation on the property. When we got the offer at 700, the committee felt that it was lower than where market would be. We had some challenges with Park 1. Park 1 has been what's the right word? The leases that are in place at Park 1 are month to month. They haven't had a lot of escalations. We have operating expense increases. So financially, Park 1 Retail doesn't look great on paper. So what we found is a lot of the investors or developers that looked at the property through the RFP process saw the financials, saw the pending expenses with not a lot of wiggle room in that. So we were able to get the highest purchaser at 700, our proposed purchaser at 700 up to 750, but we couldn't get him any higher than that. In looking at the evaluation of the property, There is indications that it could trade at a higher number, upwards of $1 million potentially, depending on what's done with the property. But with that, there's risk and return. And we talked as a committee about that risk and return. If we want to get rid of it today, 750 is the number, and 750 does fall within the range of a reasonable expectation for the property. It is a low price per square foot, but based on what needs to be done and based on the income and expense that is currently being generated on the property, it doesn't necessarily justify or would qualify for a loan outside of that number. Now, with that being said, if one was to stabilize that investment, put a little bit of attention into it, fill our vacancies, certainly right now we're at 32% vacant in the space. That affected significantly the value of the property based on what could be paid for based on the income and expense. So sales comps are right in that range. We have a high of $55 to $60 a square foot. Lows down at the 30. I can certainly run through our evaluation. We did that to bracket what the potential could be for the property. The idea of the committee was let's see if we can maximize this asset for the city with a little bit of work on cleaning the property up, getting some more tenants in there. We're working on now backfilling those vacant spaces. That would certainly either bolster the value or perpetuate the value that is in place. So, any questions?
Thanks. Matt, let me just ask you to draw the bigger context here of how we were marketing the property through the RFP process. So one of the things the council was looking at and we've put off is redoing our policies and regulations on how we sell property. This was being sold on an RFP. Can you tell us how that works and what's good and bad about that, in particular, probably the bad part? So
Sure.
Go ahead.
So when we typically sell real estate, it's all about positioning that asset to garner the best price. While an RFP allows everybody to come in, it puts certain guidelines with respect to how they need to present that proposal. John outlined it very well. We started this process in October. We went out in April or earlier than that. We responded in May, June, and we're now coming to a final answer in September. That typically doesn't work with the standard real estate process. So while we had a lot of people, this went out nationally, while we had a lot of people get packets and have interest jumping through the process of an RFP, but we had a lot of people who said, well, can we just write an offer? Well, no, you can't. We need to follow this process. So one of our recommendations to dispose of real property is to truly set it up like a standard real estate process, is let the market dictate where that plays and be a little bit more fluid in how we transact that piece of real estate. So by opening it to a normal process, we can position that asset to, hey, we've got an open offer, period, and then we're going to be able to react very quickly to that. Time is money. We've seen interest rates jump up probably a full point since we put this on the market.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions, Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Gillick?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I don't know that you have an answer to this, but generally that area doesn't get much foot traffic. And so, the proposals that may be rejected had kind of retail uses for that or restaurant uses. Considering that there isn't a lot of pedestrian traffic that goes down that far, even though the parking is available very often, what do you think would be some good uses for this space that a business would be successful at in this location? Thank you.
Yeah, so the primary tenant base right now for Park One is office space. So we've got Volunteers of America, we have some city volunteer crime prevention center. They take up 7,000 square feet of the 16,000 square feet. Instaprints is kind of a small retail venue, but Self-Help Law is in there. We had a daycare in there, so more service related entities, not necessarily walkable retail, but that changes. As we see the development of 29th, now we have Hannison Home, we've got A&E, there's a lot more on 29th coming this direction. It's slow, but sometimes it takes that investment to truly change it. Hannison Home is a great example. That was a really quiet, actually apartments on the main floor. Wasn't highest and best use. The developer went in, gutted the place, brought in light, brought in new tenants. So it can change. It just takes time and money.
Very good. Councilmember Gillick?
I guess maybe just first a comment, maybe as in reaction. I suspect that the two-way conversion of streets will help a fair amount with actually providing more foot traffic and making the spaces more desirable for tenants. And I'm really glad the city is selling this, because I think, we're just not in the business of optimizing the value of these spaces. So I think it's a good thing we're doing. Here's the question. I think it's really appropriate, clearly in this project, that we would change our process from an RFP to an offer. I guess the question would be, there are cases where we're looking, wanting to evaluate not just the sale price, but also what's going to be built in the space, like where there's new construction. Here, that's not the case, but a new construction, a skyscraper that brings in, millions of dollars in property taxes has greater value to us than a one-story building. But if the one-story building had to put in an offer that was $1 higher, clearly, I think we could say that the skyscraper is the way to go. Do you envision a process where there's an offer would still allow us to evaluate based on public benefit, I guess? Or would it be purely based on dollar value?
So one of the criteria that the committee looked at was, obviously, we're using these funds to help offset additional expenses in the new city hall. So while we did have some offers that came in that were more nonprofit based, lower offers at $1, it didn't necessarily, one, it wasn't for the whole space. It was for a small portion of the space in which we couldn't necessarily demise because our condo documents haven't been done quite yet. But that also inhibits the potential purchase. If we go single condos, and the committee talked about it, if we go single condos, it's going to prohibit the potential purchase of the entire space. Now we onesie-twosie it. We might get a higher price per square foot for those smaller spaces, but now the process belabors significantly. While we can do that, there's risk in return with that. So we didn't see anything, at least initially, through the RFP process that would be significantly beneficial. Hold that thought, because the next time we come talk to you, there is that component that really makes a big difference for downtown.
Thank you, Councilmember Parrington.
So thanks, Matt. I'm trying to get a sense of your market valuation for this property.
Mm-hmm.
I think the $45 a square foot, that was too low. But then you said a high in that area was $55 to $60 a square foot.
John, if you want to scroll through, or do we have a clicker? Yeah, so when we look at evaluating a piece of property, we look at it a few different ways. We look at an income approach, because that's how a bank's going to look at it. And then we look at a sales comparison approach. So we look at both sides of these. This is our sales comparison approach. This gives us an idea of what other properties downtown have sold that are consistent. So we would consider Park 1 a borderline Class C, Class B property. Needs some work, kind of funny walls. More than likely, a developer will have to come in and gut it and bring it back to a retail standard. So we pulled comparables that were consistent. The property comparable 4, that's in my opinion, a really good example. Comparable 4 is my example of Hannison Home. That property was an old old property right next to the Athenian on 14 North 29th Street. The development group, I was part of that development group, came in and purchased the building for $800,000, and we pretty much gutted the whole thing. Lipstick upstairs, but the whole main floor was apartments and lower income apartments. We brought that back to a retail component, so we have 2 retail spaces, but that cost us about $1.5 million to do. So it is expensive. I think we're all in at $2.2 million on that building. So while the initial acquisition cost of $800,000 was a component, it was a small component in the entire remodel of the project. A little bit outside of our core, we have our other 3 properties. This is unique is that it is still in the core, but definitely on the tertiary of the core. We've got the 3375 2nd Avenue North. That was a Class B office product. This is a good example, and you look at our higher price per square foot with that one at $62, that was a fully leased office building. So that's kind of our end cap. If you look at a $62 a square foot at 16,000 square feet, we're pushing that $1 million price point range. So if we're fully leased, even with Class B tenants, there's a good chance that we're going to be able to hit a higher number. John, if you scroll up to, so these are sales comparables. That gives us an idea of what's selling around us that's comparable with their subject property. The income approach is, how is an investor or a developer going to pay for that? On an income approach, we try to assess the true market value. So while you can see unit or 224 North 29th is vacant, we've applied a $10 a square foot modified gross lease rate to that. So while that's vacant, we're still applying income. Drop down to 2906, also vacant, applying $10 a square foot, and then the Crime Prevention Center at $10.25 a square foot. What we did there is the Crime Prevention Center is very similar in condition and space to Volunteers of America. It's a little bit bigger, so that price per square foot drops a little bit. The other 2, a little bit rougher around the edges, a little bit smaller, but $10 a square foot we felt was a fair market value. That derives the total top line of what an investor, based on the current condition, what investor can get on that. We added 12.5% vacancy, which isn't the actual vacancy. Remember I said 32% actual vacancy, and then our what could be operating expenses based on what we see through our entire management team. That derives a net operating income, and then from that net operating income, we apply a cap rate. Scroll down a little bit, John. There we go. So with our net operating income, if fully leased, an investor has the ability to receive $80,000 cash. If they apply cap rate, and our cap rates are ranging right now from 7.5 to 9.5, we have this value, this potential value range on the property. $1 million to $835,000. We typically split that in the middle to say, okay, this is probably where we'd settle if we were full. So that comes in at $933,000. Could we get the higher end? Potentially, depending on what we can get for tenants and how we can mitigate expenses, things like that. So with that, we scroll all the way down, maybe 2 pages. So that talks about, and this is all for you guys. If you guys want to read it, you can. It just talks about the comparables, why it applies to our subject property, why we thought it fit. Keep going, where they're located relative, and here's our blend. So while the offer counter price of $750 falls close within our overall market range, there is some upside potential to the property. And the committee felt that there was an opportunity to maximize that value for the city, thus the recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Joy. Councilor Shaw?
Just a little follow-up in terms of if we think maybe office space would be a potential for an investment, someone to invest in, to use it as office space. I took a tour with Mr. Casey from the downtown partnership at the beginning of the summer in the month of June, and we walked through downtown, and we went to each property that is vacant. So looking at the number of buildings that we have vacant in our downtown area, how likely is it that, this property is really going to be able to match that potential based on the fact that there's a lot of vacancies, not all of them, but there are a lot of building spaces available. So, thank you.
That's when I pull the crystal ball out of the closet and say, this is exactly how long it's going to take. We don't know that. This has a little bit of, because of the frontage, we do have a lot of vacancy in office downtown. It is certainly an issue that we're trying to mitigate, potentially with more downtown housing and things like that. We've talked about that. You don't know. With return comes risk, and we've talked about that. Is we have the ability to potentially find tenants to get these spaces. We have, through the RFP process, through our marketing, we get a lot of inquiries on people saying, well, would they lease it? We don't know that, but let's have that conversation. So if we do get a developer or we decide to lease it ourselves, we have this stable of potential tenants. We have those. We're actually working on a lease right now with a daycare that approached to say, hey, can I lease this space? This could work really well for my business. So we do have those, and we're working through those to try to convert those leads into actual tenants. So yes, we are working on that. Yep.
Councilmember Shaw and Councilmember Owen.
Thank you. This doesn't require a public hearing, so I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. I move to reject all proposals to purchase Park 1 ground retail space to Journey Willow Cottage LLC as recommended by the City Council Operations Committee.
Thank you very much. Second by Councilmember Neese. Discussion, Councilmember Shaw or Neese, did you want to address your motion? And the Councilmember Owen?
Yeah, I just want to speak to it quickly to say, we've got to fix this sooner rather than later. I know we had a good discussion, a long discussion last week about a number of ways we can change this process, but I think the RFP one, we have to get on that faster, even if we can't agree on the rest of it quite yet. So I would encourage us to move forward so that we can potentially see some better offers next time.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And thank you for staff and really for all the work that was put in this. And I think that I agree with Councilwoman Shaw's recommendation that we get through this change so we can list it without that and maybe come to those sticky point changes later on the road. We can always change code twice. So, and the other thing that I think that we talked about, and Mayor, you were there at the meeting, you can discuss that too, but there was additional cost because we had to lease back some of the property until the city hall was done. So there's additional money expense that would cost us as well. So we have time. And so I think moving forward, that's the whole idea, was we have some time. Even if we list it again, we get the same amount, we at least don't have to pay the additional cost for the public safety area. So I'll vote for this and hopefully work with the staff to get this changed so we can list it.
Thank you, Councilor Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask a question, if that's still all right.
Of course.
And it's sort of along this same vein. So I hear what you're saying about the cumbersome process. I get a little uncomfortable at the thought of just doing straight up offers because I think we still have all the sort of things we've talked about, the public duty and all that kind of thing. I've been doing a little off the cuff legal research here, which is real dangerous, and Gina can interrupt me if I say something that's harmful here, but there does seem to be some concept of a public auction in lieu of an RFP. And I'm curious as to your thoughts about that. Would people participate in a public auction for municipal property? What does that look like? Is that something that should be considered?
Yes, I think yes and no. Auctions are a great way to dispose of property as long as you get the right audience. Sometimes, especially commercial property, you don't have a buyer. So no matter what price you put on it, the buyer won't show up. And if one buyer shows up and comes in super low, they're your only buyer. So while that disposes of property, if our job is to dispose of property, we can get that done. But does it maximize the value? Our job as brokers is to position an asset to best maximize the value based on what we have to play with. And that comes in with how do we market that? How do we present it to the market? How do we best maximize the asset that we have. And a lot of times there's ebb and flow in that. So yeah, that's a tough one. I've seen auctions work very well, but I've also seen properties sold at super low prices.
So maybe surplus equipment makes more sense in that kind of environment. Can I just ask a quick follow-up, Mayor?
Sure.
Do you work with other municipalities that do just an offer process?
Municipalities, no. We work with a lot of large entities. So Montana State University System is a client, MSUB is a client, St. Vincent Healthcare is a client. We have a lot of large entities that we deal with. Most of that is just through actual sale process because we're trying to maximize it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Matt, while we're on questions, one of the things I think you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but although the vacancy rate downtown is very substantial for retail and office, typically those are rentals. And my understanding is there's almost nothing available in the way of ownable, which would mean condoed, small retail space. So if you're a small business person, you want to own your property just like you own your house, they're virtually squat downtown, and especially if your requirement is easy access to parking, which is a deal breaker for many. Have I overstated that, or is that the reality?
No, I mean, you look at the demand that we saw at the Empire Garage. Those were cold, dark shell condos that the city sold off in a private public partnership. That worked really well. Those absorbed very quickly. You're right. There's not a lot of availability in downtown, small downtown spaces. We've seen a few of them trade. Fourth floor, Montana Power, the frat building, the second floor, that's condoed out. Stapleton building is condoed out. But again, most of those are family owned, either on the commercial side, it's all one family owned and they're all tenant spaces. So you're right. There's not a lot of availability. Does it increase the pool? Certainly does, because now you can go to the other mom and pops operators downtown that are currently leasing may have an opportunity to purchase if they want. So, and that just drives up the price.
And just a second question about residential. We all know that there's a real dearth of residential opportunity and space downtown. And what residential does exist tends to be also for rent as opposed to ownable. The Stapleton building, very high-end space, typically starting at about $500,000 per unit. This space cries out for first-floor retail, commercial that activates that straight. Everybody gets the value of that. But if there's a huge demand for residential, is there any way that this property actually could be turned into first-floor residential? I'm thinking about the cost, the starting point. A lot of money to have to be put into it, but at 16,500 square feet and 6 units, all at different spaces, but on average, that's 2,750 square feet per unit. That's a medium-sized house, not even a small house, but that's a lot of square footage for a very nice residence. And your cost before improvements, which would be very high, of course, is only $123,000 at $45 a square foot. Is residential for some of these units a possibility?
Main floor, I would say probably, in my opinion, probably not. Main floor, we have a few main floor residential units on the east side of town that have been quasi redeveloped, all rentals, not necessarily ownership. I think egress, with respect to bedrooms having legal egress, that I don't know exactly how that would work. I don't know how the condos work up there, but I know that would be a question for me. So I would say highest and best use probably still staying on the retail side of things. It could convolute things. We've got concrete floors. We're moving plumbing. It starts going up quick. So I would say it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Council, anything else? We've got a motion on the floor. Councilmember Tricky.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Okay, let's start with this one. So, one of my concerns with selling the first floor is that that then means that if we wanted to sell that entire block, we wouldn't be able to do it, right?
It would be more cumbersome because you'd have to get that developer, whoever bought it, to come to the table. Not impossible. We just sold another downtown building to one entity with two condos in it. But they all came together and sold together. So it not impossible, but doable. One of the things that the committee brought up was, what if, once we stabilize, we sell the whole thing? We sell the garage and, it's probably no surprise, we're not making a ton of money on our parking garages. So what if we sell that to a private individual? Might be an option. There's a lot of properties downtown, especially in that area, that need parking. That parking garage is pretty full. There might be an opportunity where we can the goal is not just say, okay, we don't like this, but let's see how do we best maximize this full opportunity, stabilize it. Let's get a new process in place to maximize the value of that asset, and then work down that road.
So what do you think it would take to stabilize it?
Stabilize with respect to getting other tenants in there so there's not as much risk for an investor to come in. So if we've got tenants paying X amount of money and we're passing through some of those expenses or building in a way to pass through those expenses, it mitigates the risk that an investor is going to take. Now, they could turn it, as spaces turn over, they can remodel and upgrade, but they know if they buy it today, they can make the mortgage on it, they can do small upgrades.
So it is let's say we get an offer for $850. Are we really thinking that the value of that $850 that we get is worth the loss potential for what we could be doing long-term in that space?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I can answer that. That's the crystal ball in the back closet again.
Yeah.
And we talked about that with the committee, is that there is risk and return. If we're looking to maximize the value of this asset, we are risk losing a $750 offer. And the potential of us going through all of this process, we will save some money. So the last offer that was in place required the Crime Prevention Center to lease back at approximately $30,000 a year. So that was that was an expense to the city that is currently not there. They're not paying rent. So that mitigates a little bit of that. But we certainly talked about the idea, we could sell this again, put it on the open market, have multiple bids again, and our offer is $750. Certainly could be.
Okay, Chris?
Sorry, Mayor, I know I want to be quick. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So in the ordinance that was up for consideration last week, just want to point out that section 22-903, additions, requirements for sale, exchange, and donation of city real property, C, the recommendation was for the sale of real property, the city may sell property by bid, public auction, or direct negotiation of sale. So the idea was to open that up to any of the three. And I think to Councilmember Gulick's question, I don't think a direct sale, at least in my past, doesn't mean you can't have any conditions on that sale, but the more conditions you put on the sale, the fewer offers you may get. So that was really the intent of that particular section. And I think if we reject the bid tonight, which is what the committee's recommendation is, I think it would behoove us, frankly, to get this piece of the ordinance taken care of within weeks, not months, because we're sitting on this property. And though for the next 12 months, we're benefiting from some of our own functions using it, with the next item on the agenda and the other projects we're doing, we really want to, frankly, dispose of a handful of these properties that we're selling to get them on the private market, get them bringing in taxes, and bring revenue in to cover our other project costs. So thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And Council, I just want to alert for anybody who was not at the discussion concerning the Family Justice Center, that the three properties were specifically mentioned as possible locations for a future Family Justice Center. And there might be 400 of them at some point, but three were specifically mentioned, two of which are owned by the city, one of which was this property. Another one was the Parks and Rec building with the senior center once the Parks Department moves out to the new City Hall. And then, of course, the YW was interested, and it has some extra space as well. So just full disclosure, that was part of the discussion at those meetings. Okay, council, anything else before we vote on the motion? Don't see anything, so the motion is to accept the Council Operations Committee recommendation to reject all proposals. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes with the exception of Councilmember Tricky, who votes in the opposition. That resolves item number 7. Council, it's 7:35. Traditionally, we take a break. We've got one more item. What's your pleasure? Keep moving, keep moving?
We may have public comment on non-agenda.
We may have public comment. Can I just get a little show of hands on item number 8? Well, actually, no, there's no public comment on item number 8.
The non-agenda item.
Oh, on the non-agenda items. Is there anybody here, we're not asking you to come up now, but who'd like to make public comment at the very end on something that's not on our agenda tonight? No, so I'm thinking people here are probably here to observe item number 8. So council, do you want to take a break, or feel free to also just leave? Okay. So let's, anybody else want to take a very quick break? Okay, let's do that because we don't want to have any question about whether somebody could vote once somebody's gone. So it's 7:37. We'll just be gone 5 minutes. We'll come right back and conclude item number 7 and then 8. That's what Roy said, and they were. I don't quite know what the legality. Let's get going. I think we're all back, so. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We left off with item number 4. So Denise, would you read item number 4, please? Or I'm sorry, number 4. Where did I come up with that? Item number 8.
Okay, item number 8, change order number 1 with Dick Anderson Construction for construction manager at risk, CMAR contract for new City Hall. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Jessica, I guess this is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm excited to be here to talk about this change order. First, I do want to introduce the team that we have here. So our fearless leader, Assistant City Administrator Ifland cannot be with us tonight. But we also have John Caterino here. We have AJ Harmon, who's the project manager for Dick Anderson, who's our contractor. And then also Bill Haynes with Collaborative Design as part of the design team. So a little context, about a year ago, last fall, we came to you with the design development budget that we had come up with for this project, for the build out of new City Hall. And if you recall at that time, prices were coming in higher than what we had originally budgeted. And I do also want to thank the Budget and Finance Committee. We've worked with them throughout this entire process. They've been very helpful in guidance and ideas and just bouncing things off in terms of how are we funding things, what are we spending money on, are we spending money on the right places, what's the value that we're achieving. So when we came to you, when we came to the Budget and Finance Committee with the design development budget, we worked through some different scenarios in terms of should we cut back on scope or should we be looking at other funding sources? And the decision made at that time was we want to do the full scope of the build out. Some ancillary things got value engineered out, but every option that we gave in terms of not building out council chambers or not building out some office space, council decided, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do the full build out at this time. One of the things that was not mentioned at that time was replacing all of the windows. When we did our due diligence, and I think that's where our slide where we can talk about some of the background. So when we did our due diligence during the building purchase, we did get a report from Terracon. They looked at the windows. They said they're really not in great shape. They are 60-year-old windows. They originally were operable. They were rendered inoperable. There was extensive evidence of water leakage. They're not efficient. They're not a great option for having, for retaining them. However, there are 752 windows in this building, and knowing that building out the offices was the priority and getting the lobbies and getting everything that we needed to do business in this building was the priority, we did not have windows in that initial scope. So our base bid was to repair leaking windows, replace damaged glazing, and then based on, like I said, those design development estimates, the decision was made to complete the build out minus the window replacement as a lower priority that hopefully we'd be able to do at some point in the future. The windows do account for 40% of the building envelope, and replacing them would significantly increase the building efficiency and comfort compared to the 60-year-old windows currently in place. So the new windows that have been specified will be double paned, low E, argon-filled glazing units. The windows will have a two-part frame to provide for easier replacement in the future. Right now, the window units that are in there actually have clips that are bolted into the precast concrete panels, meaning that you have to tear out a significant amount of the wall to even get to the clips to pull the window out. So the new design will be this two-part frame where we can put the frame in, we can put the unit in. If that unit fails or needs to be replaced in the future, you're not having to tear apart the wall, reframe it, re-sheetrock it, repaint it. So it'll be a lot less intrusive. So when we look, when we got our bids back on the construction phase, our numbers came back lower than what we were expecting by about $2.5 million. At that point in April, we did go to the Budget Finance Committee and say, this is gonna be less than what we last told you. What should we do? Should we say, yay, we're saving money, or should we tackle this really important part of the project? And there were actually two key things that we brought to the committee, and that was the window replacement and then full generator backup for the building. So we did pursue both of those things. So we got started in April on saying, let's move forward with what this window replacement looks like. We had the complication of the being a historic building. So we did have to come up with a design that would match the historic look of the building, that would get approved by National Park Service as we go through the historic building tax credit process. So, but committee did recommend, let's go full ahead with the window replacement. So we worked with the contractor and designers to ensure that it would be in line with the historic preservation requirements, and the window scope was advertised by Dick Anderson in August of this year, and they received 4 bids. So the proposed scope, as I said, there's 752 windows throughout the entire building. We would demo and install windows on all the floors, all the windows except the county suite on the 3rd floor. The cost for this would be about $2.4 million. So it's about $418,000 over that $2 million estimate that we came to the committee with in April. This number does include a 5% contingency. Assuming everything goes well, we would get that contingency back. This includes having to demo the gypboard framing and window units that are in there now. The previous owner did put gypboard, paint, framing around all of the windows on the exterior walls. So that does need to be removed to replace the windows. And then we would go back with new framing, new gypboard, painting, finishing, all of that. Part of this bid includes Dick Anderson having a dedicated on-site project superintendent specifically to oversee the window installation, because it is a special, sort of an extra special part of the project besides the rest of what our superintendent is doing now. We want to make sure that there's someone there to oversee the window replacement specifically. So the proposed funding, we do have project contingencies in place. Right now, we have about a little over 1.7 million remaining between contractor and owner. And that's the contingency that we build into the budget in case we have things that are going over, that we're expecting as the course of the project to have some overages, or adding scope as we go along. The other option is that we could reduce scope of work. So we could delay the exterior signage, that's $200,000. We have a $71,000 allowance for landscaping. We have an AV allowance of $450,000. We have furniture estimated just under $2 million. We have our security package, which is our cameras and access control for $575,000. We have our generator backup, which we've already worked on the design. We've ordered some of the parts that we need for that, but that hasn't, but that could be scaled back and we could realize some funds there. There was a question by the committee about the tile river in the gallery lobby. We were told we would only save about $6,000 if we omit that. So not a big savings. And then the historic tax credits. Like I said earlier, we are going to get a report at the end of this week from our historic tax credit consultant, who's going to, it's going to list out where we're at, what proceeds we can expect from this process, and then we'll have a better idea of what the actual estimate that we could get from historic tax credits. And we're also expecting to get energy rebates from Northwest Energy for about $72,000. Okay, and that was the end. We were trying to make it brief. We did go over a lot of this with the committee, and I will leave it at that. So if we have any questions, and we have team members here from the design team and the construction team.
Thank you, Jessica. Councilmember Owen.
So, Jessica, I just want to square what's being presented tonight with what we talked about in the committee, because I think we've enjoyed working with you as well and had an open dialogue. But the decision to dedicate about $2 million of this was sort of already made. We're talking about trying to cover the differential of about $420,000.
Correct.
Correct. I want to make sure council members are clear that from that list, we don't need to come up with 2.4 million.
Correct.
So that everybody understands we're talking about a expected window cost of 2 million that ended up in a real window cost of 2.4 million.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And just on that point, we don't have to do that tonight. It's just
Correct.
you're foreshadowing what's going to have to happen in the future.
Yeah, I think the budget committee had recommended that you provide council members with the assurance that $420,000 could be covered. So you've provided the list here of the various places that amount could come from, primarily the contingencies that have only been tapped at about 100,000. Is that what you had told us?
Yes.
Yes.
That's correct.
So there's quite a bit of cushion there still. And I think Councilmember Gillick had a lot to say about this in Budget Committee, so he might tonight as well. But it was certainly our recommendation that we move forward even with the overage.
Yes. Thank you, Councilmember Owen, for clarifying that. In terms of the proposed funding, like you said, we were sort of giving a menu of options. Here's some potential places where we could pull that 400,000 to sort of make up the difference above and beyond the 2 million that we had already expected for windows.
Thank you. And Jessica, just to repeat what you say in the staff report, obviously these are going to be a lot more efficient. And if we were not to replace them, we'd be literally sending valuable hot air out the window. And the proposed or the expected ROI on this $2.5 million investment is about 15 years, after which they will have paid for themselves. Just
Correct.
That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And I believe, Mayor, that's a very conservative estimate based on the historic data we have from the building. We don't have new data from the building with our being fully occupied or mostly occupied.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Parrington.
Thank you, Mayor. Jessica, just to clarify this, when the memo says upon the recommendation of the Operations Committee, was that actually supposed to be the Budget Committee?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Because I think we discussed briefly this in our Operations Committee, and so I'll pull my recommendation to keep the cost on. I think I suggested doing half the windows and something else. So I think if the ask is only, 420,000, that's fairly reasonable. I thought it was going to be, 2.5 or something like that. So thank you.
Councilmember Parrington.
I'm confused. So I'm totally confused. So I read all of this about the window replacement. I was going, okay, great and everything. But then I get this, and this is the change order number 1 for this CMAR contract. So this isn't right. This is the contract. This is change order 2 that's on this one. That's on what I'm looking at online. So I'm kind of confused where we are.
Yeah. So you see that?
So we're not looking at his contract, we're looking at the contract for the windows? Or,
Well, maybe it's a change order to the Dick Anderson contract, but it's, what we have in the packet is identified as number 2, where the agenda says number 1.
right.
Yeah, under the title on the memo, it does say change order number 2. Under the agenda, it references change order number 1.
So that should be number 2, just to be absolutely clear, correct?
Correct. So Mayor, and Councilmember Purinton, good catch. So the initial contract we had with Dick Anderson was when we selected them to be our contractor at risk. Then change order 2 was when we did the GMP, the guaranteed maximum price. That was the majority of the project.
Okay.
Thank you for catching that.
Well, don't confuse me like that.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Other, Councilmember Neese.
Just to clarify, since we caught that minor mistake on the agenda item it was a kind of a typo from 1, it should have been 2, and that was public noticed. Gina, is that something that we need to worry about?
Councilmember Neese, you're referring to the difference on the agenda saying change order 1 and the actual staff memo saying change order 2?
Yeah, the change order number 1 was advertised to the public, but it was actually supposed to be change order number 2.
Right. I'm not concerned about that, given the information that is in the actual staff memo. I think that that's also part of the agenda, and I think there's been sufficient notice.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Gielich.
Since we're not having a public comment, or is not required in this, I'm going to make a motion, move to approve change order number 2 with Dick Anderson Construction for construction manager at risk contract as recommended by staff.
Thank you. Second by Councilmember Owen. Okay, further discussion. Jessica, since there's 752 of these windows, can we sell them? You can get your little name on, this window brought to you by Pam Purington and.
Yes, we will entertain any donation suggestions, sponsorships.
Yeah, maybe if you have a big name out on the outside of the building. Doesn't do much good to have a little plaque on the inside, I don't think, but maybe on the outside. Okay, other discussion. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I just wanted to say thank you and to the people organizing the tour of the building. So when we did the building tour, we were able to see the windows, and there was quite a bit of discussion about this that we're seeing tonight. And that was really quite helpful. And just to know that these windows are somewhat unique and that it takes a lot to have windows replace it that meet that National Historic Register criteria is quite interesting. I don't think anyone who ever goes to that building will know what it takes to get the right kind of windows and put them up there right. But thank you very much for the tour. It was helpful.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. The motion is for approval, item A, change order number 2. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. That concludes item number 8. Thank you. We'll now have public comment on non-agenda items. Is there any public comment on anything that was not on our agenda this evening? No one is coming forward. No one is online. So we'll close the public comment period. Council initiatives. No council initiatives. We are adjourned.